Hello there, this is Dave with the Reformed Apologist channel. I'm following up here with part 2 of my video following up on the talks over Satan's name in the Bible. Now, I'm obviously quite aware that endless arguing is actually a sin, and that we shouldn't forever focus on Satan. We're supposed to be, focusing on the things of God, all things for His glory. Obviously, Satan is a name and a word in the Bible. If I'm trying to resolve a dispute or something that's causing more division, something which is causing more division in the church and stuff, it's worth doing, and it's worth going into a little bit longer and trying to explain just a little bit further, if I could, in fact, help clarify things for people, clarify at least like my position, my point of view, where I'm coming from on it. Of the several points covered already, the first point, which is one on strata, is one of the better, more obvious, weightier points, because quite obviously Robert Morey, in his book called Satan's Devices, when he talked about the name Satan in the Bible, he was actually referring to the English Bible. Okay, he did not put on the pretenses or the appearances that he was trying to take everyone back through the Hebrew grammar and language. That's my recollection of the passage. He was just talking about surface on the English translation. Okay. Whereas in the Michael Heiser book, he's taking everyone through the Hebrew and applying a Hebrew grammar rule, which does exist and is important to know if you're studying that language. If you're interested in studying biblical Hebrew and going that deeply into that topic, then that would be an important rule to know about. If you want to do a thorough job exegeting a passage, those things are good to know. But you also have to apply the appropriate exegetical method and interpretation. You have to, the commonly used method or the one that's very, very widely accepted and good is the historical grammatical method. If you're only merely looking at grammar, you're not doing the best job ever. And to my knowledge, Michael Heiser fans are going too far if they only apply that rule. And many of them, it would seem, or some of them, many of them, it seemed, also go along with Heiser's theology on it as well, and they just seem to cast aside the historical grammatical method and just go completely for Hebrew language. That's being a little bit extremist. Okay, that's being a little bit extreme. Going back to exactly where I left off, I was talking about word ontology. The Hebrew language has that. You can't treat it the same way as the English language. A lot of these people are approaching the topic as though it's English, as though you can look at it from the same cultural and linguistic context. It is indeed very different. And I started to talk about word ontology, which is something specific to that language and culture. The Jews and many that came before have looked at the whole thing centering on God, not on men, that language is from God. And so when it says ha-satan, and you have the root word satan, or the main word satan, that's a word that implies specific characteristics and so forth. Where it is referring to Satan anyway, it's from God. God meant it to be Satan. God meant it to be the ultimate evil entity, or the supreme evil entity, and so forth. So what I'm telling you is, at least in my opinion, that was meant to be from the beginning. It's just that we're dealing with what is called progressive revelation, where things are revealed slowly over time. It took many appearances by said evil entity for people to catch on to the fact that there is this guy named Satan who tried to do those things and appeared throughout the Old Testament. Is it that big of a deal? Yes, it is a big deal, because Heiser ends up saying that when the word Satan appears with the definite article in front of it, and it's ha-satan in the Old Testament, he says that could be a human doing that. And that's not what the word means. If I take the strictest lexicon approach to that particular word, what I get from Brown, Driver, Briggs, and other lexicons is that there really is only two definitions for that word in Hebrew. And the Brown, Driver, Briggs in particular make sure that the reader understands that this is checked from following a different article. It essentially has 3 letters. which are the Shin, Tet, and Nun. There's two definitions. One is adversary, two is Satan with a capital S, which is the proper name of that being. So, in cases where the grammar and context indicates an adversary, like for example the one that's in Numbers, then that would be something or someone that could be human. When it's implying a devil, we're most likely talking about Satan. Like for example, Book of Job, that's viably Satan with a capital S. Okay. Now I know there's people who oppose me on that. I know it became hotly debated when it shouldn't be. When I look at my English Bible, my NIV. NIV is a trusted translation. Take up my NIV. I'm looking in Job chapter 1. It says in chapter 1, verse 7, the Lord said to Satan, capital S, "Where have you come from?" Satan answered the Lord, and I quote, "From roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it." Okay, end quote. That's, when I look at the context and what's going on in Job, it is viably Satan. That is viably Satan, even from the context and everything that happens. I have another lexicon entry here, which says, and I quote, "With the article, it assumes the nature of a pronoun, and is Satan, capital S, the devil, the evil genius, in the later theology of the Jews, bracket, rather in the true revelation of God from the beginning, who seduces men." And then it goes on about 1 Chronicles. The Jews really had more respect for the Hebrew language as coming from God, and their understanding obviously flourished from that. Another point that I wanted to say is that if you're not sure from what I'm telling you, you're not sure that Satan even appears, let's say you've been speaking with someone who's a Michael Heiser fan, or someone's trying to convince you that Satan doesn't appear at all in the Old Testament from what Heiser wrote. Sam Shamoun has an article on this topic, but it's more just overall Satan in the Old Testament. So Shamoun's article is on his blog. It's on his blog, Answering Islam. The article is entitled Satan in the Old Testament, Part 1. You can look it up on the internet. I have it right here. I can read from it a little bit. He says, "In this series of posts, I'm going to provide evidence from the Hebrew Bible for the existence of Satan as a spiritual archenemy that opposes God's people. I primarily do so because it is argued that there are a few scanty references to Satan in the Old Testament that are questionable, since scholars claim that these texts are not actually referring to the same spiritual antagonist which appears in the New Testament." And then Sam goes on to give the passages where he also knows and is saying that Satan is mentioned, and Shamoun seems to be saying that Satan, with a capital S, is appearing in the book of Job. So in Job 1:6-12, that is actually Satan, the proper name, the supreme or ultimate evil entity. That means that there is a scholar that I can cite who does seem to be saying that when the word Hasatan appears in the book of Job in the Old Testament, that does actually mean Satan with a capital S in English. And they would stand behind that as the proper translation of Hasatan. Sam Shamoun seems to be indicating basically really quite clearly that is Satan appearing in the Old Testament when Satan appears in the book of Job. Just to close up here, I really have started to think that wooden interpretation has really too much infected the culture overall, and that is coming from these kind of discussions. People they really seem to be losing their head in favor of just following one guy in the current times, in our contemporary state of things. It's really strange to me. It's really strange. But I will end here with a couple verses that more speak to some of the other issues that I was talking about, and in regards especially to some of those race things and the stuff that is going on. Romans chapter 9 verse 8. In other words, it is not the children by physical descent who are God's children, but it is the children of the promise who are regarded as Abraham's offspring. Also, Romans chapter 10 Verse 12, for there is no difference between Jew and Gentile. The same Lord is Lord of all and richly blesses all who call on him. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. I hope everyone had a good Easter. God bless.